I've never been actually scared to do a review on an eyeshadow palette. This is like the weirdest feeling ever. There is so much controversy, as I'm sure you guys know if you're here watching this video, about the Anastasia Subculture palette, that it's unfreaking real. Side note, I do have 2 different eye looks going on right now. I know I look a little bit crazy, but I am going to be doing a tutorial on both these eye looks using the palette, showing you guys like up close how the shadows blended out and some tips and tricks and stuff that I picked up over the past couple days from playing with the palette and experimenting with it. So I'm going to share all that with you guys today. So getting back to what I was saying, I was like a little bit nervous to make this tutorial just because I feel like people are getting so much backlash, whether it's a good review or a bad review. I feel like people are just going nuts and getting mad everywhere about this palette. So with that being said, I mean, there is pros and cons to it, but overall I do have to say I like the palette, and I'm going to share exactly why that is. So if you don't know, which I'm sure you do, a couple beauty vloggers had posted tutorials using this palette and like hitting pan, really powdery eyeshadows just kicking back everywhere, and like hitting pan on the first use, so people are just like going nuts saying, why is this happening? And then a bunch of consumers are saying it's happening to them as well. So with that being said, I feel like there has to be some sort of inconsistency with the palettes. They had to have like something go wrong somewhere, because some people are really loving the palette and some people are totally hating it. So there's definitely some inconsistency there. So with that being said, I probably, if you can wait to get the palette, I would probably wait just to see if anything happens with this, if the company comes out and says like, yeah, we freaking messed up somewhere, sorry guys. So if you are someone who had bought this palette and you're having a lot of problems with it, I would definitely send it back, get a refund. I'm sure something along the next couple weeks is going to come out where they found like a mistake that went wrong somewhere. So I'm sure the palette is going to be like reformulated in some way or repressed in some way and come out better within the next couple weeks. So if you can repurchase it again then, or just wait and hold out to get the palette then just wait. Or your other option is you could buy the palette, test it out, see if you like it, and if you don't like it, send it back. There's really not much of a big deal there, but I got my palette. I bought it myself when the first release date was. So I've had mine for about a week now, and I've been playing with it every single day. I haven't hit pan on any of the shadows. I would say the kickback in my palette is super similar to my Modern Renaissance palette. I think they both have very powdery shadows. I think the mattes in the Subculture palette, the kickback in them is definitely a little bit worse than the kickback in the Modern Renaissance palette. The mattes in the Subculture palette are definitely a lot more pigmented than the Modern Renaissance palette. I mean, the Modern Renaissance palette has some really super pigmented eyeshadows, but I also will say that I hit pan fairly quickly on my Modern Renaissance palette. You can already see like I've hit pan on a couple of the shadows. I've actually been through a couple of these palettes personally because I use it pretty much every single day. I think I've been through about 2 myself, so on the shades I use like daily, I do tend to hit pan quicker than I do on some of my other eyeshadow palettes, but also the pigment in the Anastasia shadows definitely supersedes probably any other palettes that I have. So you gotta take the good with the bad with that one. So when I first got the Subculture palette in the mail, I definitely ran into a lot of the problems that people are talking about and complaining about, saying like the shadows were hard to blend out, sometimes they got patchy, they were just like so super pigmented that they just stuck where you put them, and I definitely ran into every single one of those problems, but I figured out a way to kind of troubleshoot them. So with this palette came a new formula, which I feel like a lot of us definitely were not ready for. I feel like we're all like, we want pigment, and we finally get like the most super pigmented eyeshadows in the world, and it's like a total fail, and we don't know even what to do with them because they're that pigmented. So I feel like with a new formula, you can't use and do the same techniques that you're used to with any other eyeshadow. You kind of have to relearn, and there's definitely a learning curve to this palette. I had to pick up brushes that I normally wouldn't use in my looks, like my fluffy brushes and stuff like that kind of had to take a seat, and I had to use more dense brushes, very smaller detailed brushes. So if you don't have those brushes and you're just used to using like fluffy crease brushes, little like smaller like medium-sized blending brushes, you're definitely going to need to get some smaller brushes and more densely packed brushes to use with this. The first like 4 times I used this palette, I really didn't do that. I went in with all my like fluffy blending brushes, which you can use, but if you're going to use them, you have to use like literally the smallest freaking amount. Like I'm saying, like just literally like baby touch the tip of your brush into this freaking palette. That's how insanely pigmented it is, which is a good thing and a bad thing, just because since it's so pigmented, it's definitely going to be a little bit harder to blend out, but once you learn it and work with it a little bit, I feel like it's definitely workable and you can create some really beautiful looks. Another tip, which was a major game changer while using the Subculture palette that I learned, because I normally don't do this, it is to set your eyeshadow base with a like a flesh toned eyeshadow. So using a translucent powder, which I usually do and I always do no matter what, isn't enough. So I usually set my eyeshadow base, whether it be concealer or whatever, with a translucent powder and just go right in with my eyeshadows. And that's what I was doing the first couple days when I first got this palette, like I normally do with any other eyeshadow palette, but I found out that this isn't enough. So I would set it with a translucent powder and then also set on top of the translucent powder with a flesh, like skin toned eyeshadow of your choice. It doesn't matter which one, just so you have a really, really smooth transition when you're working with these shadows. I feel like if they cling to like any bit of like moisture, that's when the colors kind of start to oxidize and look a little bit funny, like you're seeing in some of the reviews, how they look darker and patchy in some areas. So it really, really, really helped setting it with the translucent powder and then the eyeshadow on top of that. It just made the world of difference in the blending of these shadows. So I'm just going to touch on pigmentation really quick before we jump into the tutorial, because I'm sure you've seen like a million reviews and swatches of these eyeshadows. I do want to mention that Cube is probably the least pigmented out of the whole palette, but I think it's like that for a reason. So Cube is supposed to be like a duochrome shadow, which kind of has like a pinky color switch to it. So I feel like a lot of people were bummed out that Cube wasn't super intensely pigmented, and I can definitely understand why, because I was kind of like iffy about that at first too. I'm like, why isn't it that pigmented? But when I started using it, I don't know how to explain it. Like if you put an eyeshadow down and then put like just like a shimmery shadow on top of it, it kind of masks the color underneath instead of kind of just creating that color switch. Like that's what Cube does. I'll show you an example. So here we have Roxy. I'm gonna take Primavera from the Modern Renaissance palette, and I'm gonna put that on top of Roxy. And then I'm also gonna take Cube and put that over Roxy as well. So here's what I mean. See, this is where Cube is, and this is Primavera. See how Primavera is so pigmented from the Modern Renaissance that it kind of just covers up Roxy? But here's Cube, and it kind of just gives this awesome like pinky reflex and makes Roxy into like more of like a duochrome look. Electric is pretty similar to Cube in the same way, how it's not as pigmented when you do like a finger swatch, but it's also meant to do like that duochrome effect when you put it on top of another shadow and also give that bright, vibrant, like pop effect, like brightness that looks awesome in pictures and stuff. So I actually really like Cube and Electric. And then Adorn is different. It's almost like a pressed freaking pigment, and it's so beautiful. I have it on my lid today, and it looks really intense and awesome. And then the rest are all mattes. So yeah, I'm sure you guys have already seen swatches and stuff, but they're ultra, ultra pigmented, and that's the reason why you need literally the smallest amount. So with that all being said, I think we touched on and covered a bunch of stuff, so I hope you guys got some good information out of it. I think it's time now we can jump into these tutorials showing you how I got both these looks using the palette, so if you want to see that, then just keep on watching.